I've been thinking a lot lately about neurology and computers, and also just as far as like the way that interacting with computers so much is epigenetically changing people. And, I've been on and off the internet for many, many, many years, like obviously since it really came out in the 90s. It's amazing to me how fast this has grown. And so, it's really not been very long. It's like 20 years of my life. I just remember what the internet used to be. And now what we have is bombardment of tons of information. And it's so much information that I think it's can cause a lot of clogging and problems for people. And it's almost like if information is like food for the mind, then it's like you're stuffing your face and you're not chewing it and you're not digesting it well enough because you can't take in all that data to crunch. And so one thing I did at one point a number of years ago was slow down my research. It doesn't really, it's like a conscious effort. I have to make a conscious effort to slow down. Otherwise, it's just too much information for me to process. But I really feel like with this whole neurology thing, something that Thomas Sheridan said in an interview that I was listening to of his, where he was talking about how the transhumanists are kind of like selling their paradigm by acting like we need to change our brains and upgrade the evolution of the human physiology, when in fact our brains are changing all the time anyway, and we're constantly evolving. I guess those guys just aren't satisfied with the rate that we're evolving. And so right now, there's nothing in place to slow down or stop the transhuman movement. It's progressing forward, and we're all being affected by it. And my only advice to other people who feel the same way that I do, and my advice for myself, is really just to allow Spirit to guide you. And that is where you're going to become more adaptable, because your ego is going to be less calcified. And the truth is, if you're allowing your spirit to guide you and you're adapting to the situation, you may have to accept there's nothing that you can do in the moment, okay? And you have to trust the higher, bigger scheme of things beyond yourself, which is very difficult for the ego to do. But really, if you have a significant role to play in changing things or in affecting the world, you're going to know it. If Spirit is guiding you, you're going to know what your role really is. It's very important to realize that the ego is a function. It is not an entity, okay? And that the ego function obviously becomes warped in all of us through experience. When you're born and you're just a little baby, you certainly have certain genetic traits and whatnot, but you're a blank slate. Your mind is not full of inner dialogue. When we return to that childlike mind, what we're doing is we're connecting with infinity again. The ego is so finite, and the ego makes all kinds of assessments and judgments of reality that are totally finite and actually rather false. And when you can come back into that childlike mind, you're going to have a deeper understanding. There will be less internal dialogue. And it's very difficult to quiet the inner dialogue when you don't have a connection to nature, and you're stuck on the computer, or you're stuck in a city and you don't have a whole lot of quiet time. And really also it has to do with just stepping back and not being so dang attached to the outcome and the lust of result. A good detective doesn't come to quick conclusions based on, half-assed evidence. They're always open to new evidence coming in and changing their mind. And they don't throw the baby out with the bathwater either. And I see a lot of that going on. The opposite of the elastic mind is someone who's having a nervous breakdown because they just absolutely cannot let go of their constructs. Another example of someone who's in the opposite of an elastic mind is a zealot. And we all know a bunch of zealots. There's so many of them roaming the halls of YouTube. It's really scary, actually. I can't believe how many people really actually behave this way. It's an incredibly closed-minded place to be in, and I think it actually creates a lot of misery for the person who's in it. And we all have our minds made up about certain things. We all are very opinionated. And yet the zealot is someone who is very much overly crystallized and overly polarized in their point of view. In fact, technically, these people are very overly Saturnine. And what cracks me up is a lot of the zealots on YouTube are the people bitching the most about the Saturnine current, and yet they behave in a way that is totally rigid, okay? And to be overly Saturnine is the opposite of elastic form. Saturn is about crystallization and set in stone kind of structuring, which has its place. I mean, you know, you want to have stability and structure, and that's what the archetype is really about. But too much stability and too much structure is restrictive, and it closes you off. And this is why, you know, the Saturnine current is associated with a lot of negativity. Because tyranny is about cutting off the life force, and fascism and all of that, it cuts off the inner child is very cut off by that. And who is Saturn? But Saturn, or Kronos, he ate his children. It's really, so the Saturnine current really represents the old people. It's the opposite of the inner child. And so someone who's in that very stuck mindset and who's very much a zealot is going to demonize all perceived opposition, okay? And oftentimes the zealot will tell you what you think without asking you. They'll make assumptions, they will label you, they will demonize you. And so really a zealot is a person who can never agree to disagree about whatever they're zealot about. And you can understand the position of the opposition without agreeing with them. But understanding more about your enemies really oftentimes is very educational as to why they are the way they are, where they're really coming from, and it can also like help you be more certain that you are in the right and that you do understand. And so I think, you know, when you're dealing with people who don't have an elastic mind, what you'll see is they're very attached to their semantics and their take on the way that, on what the meaning of things is. And so you'll have one person spouting out their whole philosophy about life, and then they're really they're coming from their background. You know, they were raised in certain religion, they have certain symbols and codes that have been prominent in their lives. And then you'll take somebody from a totally different background, different symbols and semantics, maybe even a different language. They'll talk about their version of reality. And actually, if you really can stand back and get beyond the semantics and get more into people's intentions behind what they're really saying and what they're conveying through symbols and codes, then you'll see that they actually are pretty much coming from the same point of view in the same place. The fact of the matter is there's a whole reality going on behind what's being presented. And the elastic mind is connecting with that. And so is the mind of a child and a baby, and someone who is in that place of innocence and in that place of allowing, which we can all get back to. Doesn't matter how damaged, tortured, fucked up you are. You can go back there again. And so the challenge for us really is to maintain this elastic mind while we're doing this work on the computer and through dealing with, you know, all the stuff that's going on out there. It can be very easy to develop a short attention span with all this mental air energy. You can get very ungrounded on the internet. You can get sort of neurotic and compulsive. You know, they say that like Facebook and whatnot are as addicting as drugs. This is very true. People who can get back into their connection with their inner child are going to have a sense of humor. They're going to be able to joke around. They're going to be able to connect with animals and babies. Oftentimes, the zealot is somebody who's not just religious. They're part of a movement, a political movement of some sort of like cause. And so watch yourself and whether or not you're becoming way overly polarized. Doesn't mean you have to agree with the opposition. In fact, you may end up being able to see even deeper into why they are so fucking wrong. But you'll still be able to adapt and to perhaps maybe even persuade people more easily because you're taking a more elastic route about it and you're incorporating an understanding of the limitations and the mindsets of those whose minds you really do want to change. So I hope that clears up some of where I want to go with this whole symbolism issue. My next vlog, one of my next two vlogs, is going to be a continuation of me discussing symbolism and the codes and how we relate to them in our reality. But I wanted to preface it with what I'm saying in this vlog because maintaining the elastic mind is going to be a big part of the next section or talk that I do about this. So anyway, have a great day, guys.